It amazes me that when I research about one thing, I find something else that completely blows me away. So much so I get overexcited, and before I know it, I've already got half a video already planned. Same could be said when I researched Pullman for the Orient Express. We all talk about the engines and the named trains, but we don't often give much thought to the carriages themselves. I never could have imagined that something as simple as a carriage could have such a rich history. The Pullman Car Company was founded in 1857 by George Pullman. By the age of 22, George had inherited his father's carpentry business on the Erie Canal. His father, who was a farmer by trade, had moved to carpentry and was a dab hand at moving buildings as the Erie Canal was dug. The family was so good that when the canal was due to be widened, the state of New York awarded the business an exclusive contract to move 20 buildings. Following the success of this venture and the successful acquisition of a contract to help raise the city of Chicago off its water table foundations by 6 feet, Pullman had gained notoriety and stability with his business and had earned several key contacts. One day, Pullman was travelling from Buffalo to Westfield on an overnight train, and he noted how uncomfortable he was. He realised there was a gap in the market for an affordable, comfortable sleeper service, and as the railroad got longer, so did the need. George used his building company ties to partner with New York State Senator Benjamin Field. Together, they began to design, build, and operate several sleeping cars. The cars at first were converted from existing rolling stock and were used on the Chicago, Alton, and St. Louis Railroad. While George had the capital from the building business, he knew he needed more investment. Luck was on his side, as the country was swept up in gold fever, and while many treasure hunters sought their fortune under the ground, Pullman saw the fortune above and was only too happy to offer the fortune hunters themselves everything they needed. For a fee, of course. After raising the investment he needed, Pullman created 2 new coaches from the ground up. They were named Springfield and Pioneer, and were the height of luxury and comfort. They were not cheap, costing over $18,000, but they proved what Pullman could do. Pullman was also a genius at public relations, and upon the death of Abraham Lincoln, offered Pioneer to Lincoln's wife when she collapsed from exhaustion after accompanying the funeral train in Chicago. George's gracious gesture not only put him in good graces with the Lincoln family, but also brought in Andrew Carnegie, one of the company's largest investors. With both personal and investment backing, the company went from strength to strength. It offered virtual hotels on reels, with fine dining cuisine and the best arrangements, and personal staff to wait on the passengers hand and foot. The staff on the trains were mostly former house slaves who had been recently freed from bondage. Many people may not like the idea of the slaves being originally forced into servitude only to be freed and then go back to the job that they knew, but the freed slaves were paid, well looked after, and Pullman knew that the work they did was first class and what he wanted on his services. Pullman was a shrewd businessman, but he was also exceptionally worried about competition and made aggressive moves to buy out and own his competitors. The competition laws of today probably wouldn't allow for the tactics he used, but through this he was able to monopolize the market on a global scale, and soon he had carriage works all around the world and was leasing Pullman cars to various railroad companies and railway companies alike. Pullman moved his operations into one facility, and in 1869 brought the Detroit Car and Manufacturing Company to consolidate all of the manufacturing needs. He called this mammoth company the Pullman Palace Car Company, in a nod to the quality of the carriages. In 1880, Pullman wanted to build a town in order to house the growing labour force that the new factory demanded. He bought 4,000 acres near Lake Calumet. The planned model community had showing areas, churches, theatres, parks, hotels, and even a library for his employees. The town was designed to be clean and offer the workers a place to stay in relative comfort and without any vice, unlike many inner cities which were smoggy and full of saloons. After showing off his plan at the World's Columbian Exhibition in 1893, Pullman was widely praised for his charity and dedication to his work. Pullman, however, had an ulterior motive. He expected the town to make profit. Over $800,000 was spent just on land alone, and he ruled the town with an iron fist. Tenants were under the threat of eviction if their house did not meet random cleanliness inspections. Outside influences such as independent newspapers were strictly prohibited, and as within the town, as were many forms of public meetings, speeches or open discussions he would deem unsuitable. The church would remain empty, as no faith would pay the rent Pullman wanted. Even the price of basic necessities such as food and utilities was controlled and ensured that some of the profit lined Pullman's pocket. He was so paranoid about the rent payment that when he paid the workers, they were given 2 envelopes. One contained the rent money and the other the wages. He then ordered a man to stand outside the payment office to take the rent money from the workers as they left. If the men didn't give the rent over, they would be evicted in a matter of days. Despite the unusual setup of the town prospered, and within just a few years the town was valued at over $5 million. Things went well until 1894. 1894 saw a dip in business, and Pullman reacted by laying off workers, cutting wages and working hours. However, he refused to cut prices within the town. Rent and utilities remained the same, and soon many workers were faced with the choice of either a roof over their heads or food. A delegation of workers met to discuss terms with Pullman. However, he refused to meet them and ordered the men fired. The delegation gathered the rest of the labour force, and the entire plant was emptied on the 11th of May, 1894. Over 35% of the Pullman's workforce were represented by the American Railway Union. The union was not directly involved with the walkout, however they sympathised with the delegators, and its then president, Eugene Debs, agreed to boycott any Pullman coaches. Coaches would remain unhitched and on sidings unless railway companies terminated their contracts with Pullman. At first, the companies would fire the employees who were associated with the union and replace them with non-union members, but this caused other union members to walk out as well. It didn't take long for more and more workers to down tools. By the 27th of June, over 40,000 workers had walked off the rails. 3 days later, that number had increased to over 125,000. It wasn't long before tempers began to flare, and following a rally, a group of union workers began to set fire to railway buildings and notably destroyed a mail train. The news of the destruction of the mail train greatly disturbed then US President Grover Cleveland, who knew he had to act. The majority of the president's cabinet demanded that federal troops be sent into Chicago to quell the fighting and stop the union workers interfering with the trains. The strikers were furious with the troops and saw their presence as an undermining of their strike. On the 4th of July, the strikers erected barricades and overturned trucks in an attempt to stop the troops getting near the trains. The union leaders were powerless to intervene due to an earlier injunction preventing them from speaking to the striking workers or showing any form of support. The violence escalated over the next few days, and on the 7th of July, 30 people sadly lost their lives after a guardsman fired into the mob after he was assaulted. Debs pleaded for calm and begged the workers to go back to work, asking the railway managers to take the staff on a no-questions-asked basis. The companies refused and hired workers not associated with the union. The strike soon began to peter out, and the Pullman Company reopened with the strictest instructions that the workers must not join any union. The violence also cost the workers the sympathy of the public, and it was calculated over 250,000 people had joined the strike, stretching over 27 states. The public, who were at first rallying to the cause, were concerned that goods would spoil in sidings, mail stuck in the cars, and goods would not be available. The mood turned against the workmen and a union as a whole. Debs and 4 other union leaders received prison sentences for their parts in the strike, and while the strike was viewed as mostly negative, it did provide some relief for the affected workers. The state ordered the Pullman Company to sell off its residential holdings and confirmed that the company's dominance on the town as unconstitutional. Pullman had lost his iron grip. It had also prompted the government to create an annual holiday, Labour Day, to celebrate and give thanks for the efforts for the labour force. George Pullman passed away in 1897. Thanks to the Lincoln family ties, President Lincoln's son, Todd, became company president. Lincoln took the company to new heights, and in the 1920s the company's portfolio included over 9,800 carriages and over 50,000 staff. Following a lawsuit in 1940, the company was forced to split into two. The operations side was sold on to various railroad companies, and the manufacturing side continued. Pullman built its last sleeping car in 1956. Its days of luxury was replaced with efficiency and concentrated efforts on building subway cars for the New York Transit Authority and the Massachusetts Transportation Authority. Over time, the company was splintered, partially sold, and divisions were merged into other companies. The last of the Pullman companies were bought by Tenneco, who are famous for automotive parts. The town fared much better, and it eventually became a district of Chicago. The town was eventually granted National Monument status by President Obama. There are also talks into turning part of the town into a new urban park and securing the town's history. Today, Pullman carriages have taken billions of passengers and are used all around the world. In the UK, you can find at least one Pullman coach in each of the railway museums and heritage lines. While the company that George knew is no longer here, we have his splendid coaches to show off his company's work. Arguably, the best examples of the Pullman coaches were actually made long after Pullman died. In the early 1920s and 30s, the world was gripped with Art Deco fever. Fussy ornate fittings made way for straight lines and minimalist design, and the coaches were no exception. The tassels and delicate designs of the Edwardian era were replaced with paint or mahogany fittings. Gold made for white or simple block colours and was associated with glamour. This is where the Pullman coaches truly shone, and even today, if you think of Pullman, you generally think of Art Deco. The coaches range from simple and effective to serving royalty in staterooms and splendour, normally associated with palaces, and if you do have the opportunity to go inside, I would recommend to take your time and take in the splendour of the Pullman, the famous railroad car.